What's up, Taiwan? I'm Ethan Liu with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Kaohsiung in Taiwan South has seen some of the worst impacts of Typhoon Gaemi. Schools and offices have been closed for a third day as residents now focus on clearing up after huge floods. Louis Watt brings us this report from Kaohsiung.
After spending hours waiting for his home to empty of water, father of two, Kuang is now cleaning up the last remnants of Typhoon Gaemi. The storm brought this port city of Kaohsiung the worst flooding it's seen in 35 years.
昨天一早起来，一开门就房子里面就淹到楼梯就淹到2楼了，就整个也没办法下楼，就整个都是全部都是水，都坏了，全部家具都浮沉沉，就在水中。
Typhoon Gaemi brought extreme levels of rainfall across Taiwan, leaving at least 7 people dead and hundreds injured. Kaohsiung on the southern coast has been particularly hard hit. It's seen more than 1.6 meters of rainfall within 3 days. 12 hours ago, this road in the center of town was flooded up to the knees. The water has since receded, but it's still around. An army truck is helping to pump out water from a car park belonging to this residential building. There are still 300 cars and 50 motorbikes stuck underground. Almost 24 hours after the worst hit, residents were still without power and needing help.
水太急，这样把那个闸门冲下来的啦，把那个闸门冲坏掉。 所以希望政府可以补助我们，来帮忙我们大家啦。
In a meeting with disaster response officials in Kaohsiung, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te promised households compensation of $600 and vowed to improve infrastructure so the country can better cope with heavy rains in the future.
我们的治水应该是要总和性的治水，因地制宜，总和性的治水。 让它能够发挥充分的功能，以因应未来的气候变迁。
Taiwan is used to tropical storms and typhoons, but this one has been particularly intense. Residents hope necessary changes will be made to drainage and other infrastructure so that next time a storm hits, their city will be spared from similar heartbreak. Eason Chen, Devon Tsai and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Meanwhile, parts of Taiwan continue to see heavy rain in the wake of Typhoon Gaemi. People in mountainous areas and those affected by flooding are only beginning to see the full extent of the damage. Tiffany Wong reports.
Wading through storm waters, people in southern Taiwan are sifting through the aftermath of Typhoon Gaemi, which killed at least 7 people and brought flooding, landslides, and power outages affecting thousands of households around the country. In many of the worst affected areas, school and work have been stopped for a third day in a row as they focus on recovery, which looks to be a long journey ahead.
现在直接看过去就是1.8米，要进去就是要游泳。这个当古江全部人切练四四方方这样子，现在全部都满了。
In Taiwan's agricultural heartland, flooding caused major damage to farms.
大家知影嘉义关系企鹅啊的种地。 那因为以这样的台风跟这样的一个这么强大的一个风速啊，那实际上大概我们的鹅啊饼啊损失非常严重哈，所以我们初估这次嘉义县的农损啊应该会在3亿5千万以上。
The typhoon also damaged roads and even bridges, prompting officials to warn people out on the streets to be careful.
因为到目前为止啊，看起来还是有这个南部地区的很多那个县市政府仍然在。 1级警戒处理有关虽然台风慢慢远离，但是强大的这个豪雨还是在哈，所以可能我们还是要保持警戒。
Several cargo ships near Taiwan's southern coast were also caught in the typhoon, which was downgraded to a tropical storm after ripping through the country. 5 of the vessels were grounded safely, but the search is still on for 4 Burmese crew members missing after their ship sank. As heavy rains continue to pelt the country, damage from the deadly typhoon may still worsen as the country anticipates more summer storms heading this way. Chris Ma and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
After leaving Taiwan, Typhoon Gaemi made landfall in China, forcing nearly 250,000 people to be evacuated from their homes on the east coast. The storm hit coastal Fujian province on Thursday night and is expected to bring heavy rainfall across much of eastern China as it moves inland. Top government officials have been discussing flood prevention and disaster relief efforts. More than 5,000 rescuers are on standby across the region. Gaemi is the biggest typhoon to hit China so far this year. Typhoons forced Taiwan to cancel parts of its largest military drills for the second year in a row. This year, the exercises were supposed to focus on unscripted combat scenarios, but observers say they didn't see much difference. To find out more, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Michael Honzaker, a former U.S. Marine who used to train soldiers here in Taiwan, now an associate professor at George Mason University.
Hangguang, largest military exercise for Taiwan. Why are these drills specifically important for Taiwan's defense?
Well, I think there are two main reasons I would say these exercises are so important. The first is obviously it is an opportunity at the largest and highest levels of command for the military to rehearse and to practice these very complicated maneuvers, and so that's important in its own right. Second, it's an important signaling tool, sending a signal to the Taiwanese people that the military is prepared to defend them, sending a signal to Beijing that indeed they should not attempt an invasion. And of course, we can't ignore the fact it needs to send a signal to Washington that improvements are being made to the military and that Taiwan's military is worth investing in.
And this year was supposed to be the first time that these drills were unscripted, focusing on decentralization. Can you explain what that change is, why it's significant, and even maybe the decision, the motivation for that decision making?
So as best I understand, the decision was made because there has been a lot of pressure from analysts in the United States, but also in Taiwan, that the military is too hierarchical, it's too centralized, which means that the decisions are all made at the top and that the people at the bottom, the captains, the lieutenants, the privates, they wait around for orders. And obviously this doesn't really reflect how modern warfare works, where sometimes you lose contact with higher up, sometimes your higher command doesn't know what's going on. And so you need to allow frontline officers and leaders to make their own decisions. With that in mind, though, I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical because a major exercise like Hangguang is not necessarily the best place to try to introduce this bottom-up way of making decisions. The simple fact is this exercise is so large and it involves so much interaction with civil authorities and the cities and the municipalities that planning started months, probably even years ago. And so for the administration at the very last minute to say, we're going to go unscripted, simply isn't going to happen. That's just not the way these things actually work.
Do you think Taiwan should maybe get used to the fact that because it's in an area that sees so many typhoons and earthquakes, that maybe conducting a drill during these conditions?
Certainly there is a risk-benefit calculus that the highest levels of military and political leadership have to make. And I can understand the need to say this typhoon is large enough and threatening enough, we need to pause. But I would agree with you. Pause, I think, should be the operative word. Because if you really want to show that you have an organization that can adapt on the fly to an unforeseen circumstance like an enemy attack, like showing China and Washington the ability to say, you know what, this thing, we spent a year planning for it, a typhoon came, but we will adapt, we will pause, and we will start again, or we'll recock and do it again in September or in October. I think that would send a very powerful message that the Taiwanese military gets what we mean by flexibility and adaptability and pushing leadership down to lower levels.
That was Michael Honzaker, former U.S. Marine and now associate professor at George Mason University, speaking to our reporter Jaime Ocon. People are taking to the streets in Kenya to mourn those who have died in anti-government protests that have now entered the 6th week. Gina Lopez has the details.
Stop killing us! Stop killing us!
Young Kenyans carry flowers and crosses with the names of the dead, chanting for an end to the killing of protesters. Moments later, police respond by wrestling demonstrators to the ground while firing tear gas.
The lines are drawn. We are clear. There's the enemies of the people who've united, and there's the people. And now it's a tug of war, and the people have never lost.
These are the scenes on the streets of Kenya as anti-government protests enter their 6th week. Protesters are calling for a total shutdown of the country as they press for President William Ruto to step down and demand justice for the more than 50 people who have been killed in the demonstrations so far. Protests started peacefully in mid-June against a finance bill intended to service the national debt. It would have raised the cost of many basic necessities, like a proposed 16% value-added tax on bread. This was too much for many people struggling to get by, and was also seen as a sign of officials enriching themselves at the public's expense.
Women cannot afford to buy sanitary towels because the taxes were going way, way higher. And the members of parliament are paying themselves very huge salaries. So they were increasing the taxes but paying themselves.
Past protests in Kenya have generally been organized by opposition forces. But in the current movement, Kenyan youth across ethnic lines mobilized organically online. The protest intensified when their pleas fell on deaf ears, and police switched from using water cannons to firing live rounds, killing at least 50 protesters and injuring more than 400. There have also been allegations of hired pro-government mobs aimed at disrupting demonstrations, giving a pretext for the government's use of force. The protesters achieved a key breakthrough on June 25th, when young people stormed the country's parliament as lawmakers were pushing through with the planned tax hike bill. That got the government to reverse course. President Ruto withdrew the bill and reshuffled the cabinet.
I will not sign the 2024 finance bill, and it shall subsequently be withdrawn.
But by that point, the concession was no longer enough. The movement had expanded to express long-standing frustration over stagnant wages and alleged corruption under the Ruto government. It began demanding more widespread change. Protesters are also enraged as authorities continue a ruthless crackdown against protest leaders, with dozens of people missing. Independent commissions say the police aren't cooperating with investigations into alleged brutality. The government also appears to be attempting to control the flow of information.
Bodies were found in the quarry, mostly women and young children. After the Occupy Parliament protests, later that night, the internet was shut down, the media was shut down.
For now, tensions in the capital, Nairobi, remain at an all-time high, as authorities' efforts to quash protests only serve to turn Kenya's young people against them. Protesters have declared themselves the new opposition and vowed to not settle for anything less than their demands and justice for the fallen. Scott Kuang and Gino Lopez for TaiwanPlus.
The European Union's top diplomat has condemned Russia's war in Ukraine at the regional meeting in Southeast Asia.
I am aware that the Russian aggression against Ukraine may seem far away from Asia, but its consequences, be it in inflation or the increase in food and oil prices, are also felt by our populations.
Speaking at the ASEAN Post-Ministerial Conference in Laos, Joseph Borrell vowed to work closely with the organization to defend multilateralism and international law. ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a regional intergovernmental organization that promotes economic and security cooperation among its members. The group is hosting top diplomats from Russia, Japan, South Korea, the EU, and India in Laos ahead of the East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum scheduled for the weekend. Olympic athletes are stranded after coordinated attacks on France's high-speed rail brought trains to a standstill. 3 major routes are now paralyzed after signals along the tracks were set on fire and cables were cut by vandals. France's state railway company says arsonists timed their attacks to disrupt travel just before the opening ceremony. Thousands of people are traveling through France for the Olympic Games. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website and follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, we leave you with scenes of a pride parade in a town in East Germany. I'm Ethan Liu. Take care, and I'll see you next time.